as you can see, is like what we call a grandma house. Right? It's someone that's lived in here for a long time. They can really update it. They've been living here on their own. That's what's listed as. It's listed as a single family home. But what you notice is this house is way bigger than the last one. Right? And that's ideal. There's a couple ideal things that right off the bat I never see this house. Is that I like about it, the layout of the stairwell. Right? If you have the stairwell off to the side, then you have better potential layouts for like what I said in the last time. You want a like a two-bedroom layout on floor so you could yield more rent, so it would be a better business case. So, potentially, you could actually lay this out so that, I mean, you could, yeah, Matt's doing his,
this is what I do to check widths. I'm just under 6 feet, so which means my wingspan. I got monkey arms, so it's a little longer than my actual height.
Yeah.
And so this is so the interior here is probably a little.
17?
No, this is I think what's the house the lot width?
The lot width is about 17. But
So yeah.
11.
So this is a fairly narrow house actually.
Yeah.
Right. What we like to see is better width on houses, because better width on houses give us better layouts. And especially if you've got a long house, even an extra foot or 2 feet give you a lot more square footage. But even more important than the square footage necessarily is our ability to lay it out. So for example, in something like this, would you be able to frame up a bedroom and still have a hallway?
No. Tougher.
Right? A bedroom, you generally need at least 9 by 9, a condo-sized bedroom at the very least, right? But if I'm looking here, and this is 6 feet, and behind Maya over there is like, what's that? Like probably an additional 4 feet. We're probably at like 11 foot home here on the interior. We want to see minimum 13, because that gives us around enough width to frame up a bedroom, like a 9-foot bedroom, plus some framing, plus some drywall, plus a hallway.
Yeah.
Right. And so hallway is probably, unless you've got a split bedroom layout where you got bedroom up there and bedroom out there. So we have to still look at floor plans, because that's also a possibility, right? But still, even if you have split bedroom layouts, you still need to think about the rest of the place. You got to think about the kitchen and the living space and entrances. Entrances in these old homes, in the downtown style homes, are typically the front and the back. Then, even if you've got a split bedroom layout, how do you lay everything out? Right? So this is a little narrow for my liking, actually.
Yeah.
Right? To spend all that money on a renovation, this is a Graham style home. You're not going to rent it like this. That doesn't target our tenant profile. Who here has their worksheet still? So one of the questions on the worksheet was,
how do you improve the performance of this house, or something like that?
Yeah.
something.
No.
Target tenant profile.
Yeah.
Come on in. Come on, Sam. Come on. We're not gonna bite. Like, she won't bite. You already know that. Or maybe she does. Come on in. So think about who are we going to be able to fulfill the business model? That's what it is at the end of the day. And we haven't really talked about the business model too much, but we will talk about tenant profile a tiny bit now, because since I've already kind of forayed into that. So who's our tenant profile?
Young professionals, always moving.
I was pointing out to Wilson, thank you.
That's what we're aiming for. Last one we looked at first, that was just at the junction triangle, right? Young professionals like to live and work and play in the areas that they live in. They want to be 10 minutes to transit. They want to be about, they want to walk to wherever they go to, like bars, restaurants, all the hot spots, right? They don't need a lot of space to raise a family and all that sort of stuff. This is a prime neighborhood, Little Italy, right? These are the types of neighborhoods that we want to be targeting for our tenant profile. The reason why is because before, what I said is, these are the tenants that will give you the least headache, right? The biggest risk in any real estate investment is your tenant, right? Because the way that LTV is structured is the power is given to the tenant. So if you have a naturally turning tenant, then your headache's gone. You can keep up with rents, you have no headache. The whole reason why you're investing in real estate really is you don't want a lot of headache, right? So if you go, you could get a better cap rate somewhere else, but is it necessary? Like, would you put more work into it? I don't know. But this is what we're looking for. Someone that wants to live, work, play in the areas that they live in, and this is it here.
Cool. No, it's good.
Yeah.
We're gonna get into more business model type of stuff
Yeah.
later. I just wanted to give you a little bit of sense of what it is that we're looking at, though. This is a very long house. Like if I didn't bring my tape measure or my laser measure, but hell, this is a very long house. Length isn't the problem. Width is the problem, or girth. No. Length isn't the problem here, right? But the question is, can you squeeze in the layouts that you need in order to get a 2-bedroom, for example?
Yeah.
Here it could be difficult actually because of that. I would have preferred to see something a bit wider, but generally speaking, I want to give you a sense of what we're seeing here. So, old grandma style home. We are in Little Italy. A lot of these are old Italian grandmas who bought this for $40,000 40 years ago. So, we have the ability here to transform this into something substantial, something really, really nice, right? And then, you'd have the ability to do, lighter renos. You could do full guts. You could, come on in, guys.
Matt, you want me to take half the people upstairs because it's pretty packed here?
Yeah, sure. If you were with Ming before, go with Ming.
Another thing on layouts is, I don't know if you guys noticed, but remember I talked about the last home, talking about two separate ways of egress as a fire code safety. Anyone notice that there's a basement walkout there? That's huge, right? That is what we're looking for, because when you have a basement egress, it's easy for the tenant to get in and out of your home from the front rather than from the back. And these types of things are grandfathered in. Like getting a front separate entrance for your basement is possible, but you have to go through community to get it. Yeah. So let's take a look at the rest of the house and see what it's like here.
Well, this place is vacant, so we can go to the basement this time. We can talk about the basement. To answer your question,
See, that 17 is just
normal, this is a single family home.
quite there.
This is
tight.
okay.
This was
We
1 or 2 feet.
stairs,
Yeah.
that's
Or-
small. But when we,
That means no day,
Because what Mal was saying is like, when you want to build like a room, he said 9 by 9, I think really 10 by 10 is what you're really aiming for. Because you want 10 by 10, and then you want a hallway that gets to your bedroom and your common space.
that's what I did. So if I got into like the other part of the home,
What I meant was the living room upstairs is narrow. You just get rid of this. These staircases, right?
we can get rid of the staircases to the basement. Is that everyone?
Nope, there's more people.
Okay. So I misspoke. When I was just standing there in the kitchen, I was doing my wingspan, and I was like, oh my god, this is only like 11 feet, 10 feet. The reality is, actually the house is much wider. I didn't realize until I came down here because I had to see the rest of the house and I was talking to you guys instead. But the reality is it actually is much larger, so this is actually much better. So you can see how it cuts back, and then when I was measuring, I was like, oh my god, this house is like so narrow. The reality is it's actually much larger than I realized, because I hadn't walked through the other rooms yet. So it is actually a little more ideal. So we have to walk around to see what the layouts look like. But there's a basement walkout entrance. The front?
The front.
Okay. So if there's a basement entrance, it looks like there's one in the back too.
Yep, two separate entrances.
So
Oh, really?
So interestingly enough,
You can separate
this there's a possibility you could do 2 micro suites here, 2 smaller suites, and actually
Get rid of this.
get rid of this, and like I would actually like to see what the square footage actually looks like from the measuring of the as-built drawings, because this is very long. It actually has better width than I thought, which means this has better potential than I thought. So having 2 separate entrances, creating a separate basement entrance is like 25 to 30 grand.
Yeah.
Right? Digging it all out, punching a hole through. It depending on what you need to do, we've seen it in the 20 plus range, right? And so the fact that it's already there, you may be able to separate this and create not a triplex, you may be able to create a fourplex here, depending on the situation. We have to look at everything else.
But there is an issue. Like, do you guys know what would the issue be here in the basement?
Height.
Height and underpinning.
The-
Yeah, the height,
The
exactly.
floor seems to be hollow though.
The floor seems to be hollow. That was
So
something I didn't
Yeah,
notice.
so you can see that here, this much of a gap, but like, not very much.
But like it sounds like it's not on concrete.
It's
interesting.
see the original concrete over there.
There's two.
Yeah, okay.
Front and back. So they were talking about two. Oh, that's good. So the main thing from a building codes perspective is that you need 6'5". I don't know if this
No.
No, it's not 6 foot.
this is not 6'5".
No.
Yeah. So like this is probably, I'm gonna guess like 6'1". Yeah, 6'1", 6'2", right?
yeah,
From a
I'm
building codes
5'10",
perspective,
5'11", so this is
this is probably not what you could do, right? It was great on paper because we had two separate entrances, so we could do the micro suite, knock out the stairwell. But from a ceiling height perspective, not ideal, right?
Yeah.
And that's exactly the process that we go through. On paper, it looked good. From the photos, we thought maybe, and then walking into the property, it's actually not that good because ceiling height is the factor here.
So there are solutions. They're going to be expensive, and the solution, number one thing that we look at is obviously most people have heard of this. There's underpinning. You can underpin, probably gain another foot plus, right? Depending on the property itself. But there may be a solution that's less expensive to still gain the height that we need. And what we normally look for, it's harder here because it's a finished basement, but one of the things we do is, like, who was here on a property tour that we went last October in Dewson? There's none of you guys. Okay. It was an unfinished basement. It was actually a dirt basement. And what they did was they dug down near the foundations to check out the footings. Does anyone know what a footing is? These are like really technical construction crap now. I hate construction. It gives me heartburn. But let me tell you about what the opportunity is. Depending on where the footings are, and this is different for every freaking house, so you won't know, unfortunately, until you buy. But you can dig, if you break up, take out the flooring or wherever, take out the flooring, you're gonna be left with concrete. There's probably a subfloor in the concrete. If you break up the concrete near the footing, you can check the footing to see how low the footing is. And if the footing is lower than where the concrete pad has been poured, you might be able to break up the concrete and gain another 4 or 6 inches without underpinning. Much cheaper.
What's underpinning? Sorry.
Underpinning is, you've seen those basements where they have like 8-foot basements?
Mm-hmm.
Not very typical in downtown Toronto, because these basements were unfinished spaces. They didn't serve a purpose when, 100 plus years ago, when people were this tall, and these were unfinished spaces, and so only in more recent years did they decide, hey, actually, we can make that part of our living space. And so that's where they started finishing basements. But they had already poured. They already had the foundations.
Mm-hmm.
And so basically, what footings are and what underpinning is, you have earth, right? We're building on land. The house has footings that are very wide, and then the foundations sit on top of the footings.
Mm-hmm.
The foundations are the stuff that goes up and holds your whole house together, right? The footings go down how far? It's different for every house. Now, if you dig, you can check the footing. What you cannot do is you can't pour concrete, and you can't have the floor of the basement lower than the footings.
Yeah.
Because the footings hold up the entire house.
Mm-hmm.
You can go as far down as the footings, though. And so if you want to go further, then you need to dig underneath those footings,
and
pour
then-
more concrete, and then you can dig out the rest of the basement, get another foot, and then pour a new concrete pad,
Okay.
and then get basement ceiling heights that look like this now. right?
That's
So it's a big job. People throw around the term underpinning. Oh, yeah, just underpin it.
Underpinning.
It's a
Okay.
big freaking job. I've seen houses fall over when they weren't being underpinned properly.
For something like this, it'll probably cost you what, like $100,000?
Generally, I think there's a metric of like, I don't know,
Something per square foot.
450, 500 a linear foot.
Okay.
But generally speaking, it ends up being a price tag like that.
Yeah.
It's going to depend on size. It's going to depend on a whole bunch of factors. But generally, it's a big ticket item, but you gain a lot of value out of it, right? So what we want to do is say, okay, that's the extreme. We know that we can underpin. Or generally speaking, we know we can underpin. If we can avoid underpinning and we can just break up the concrete slab, if we can gain the height that we need, right? And maybe that's, I don't know, maybe that's 6'5" or whatever it is, right? And if we can gain what we need without underpinning,
That's great.
that would be fantastic.
Yeah.
Right? And then we want it 6'5" because 6'5" is what we need for it to be a legal duplex at the very least. And then 6'11" generally is supposed to be for a triplex. There's ways around that. I'm not going to get into that right now. I don't want to get too heavy into construction, but generally speaking, this ceiling height is lower than we would have liked, which means that there's additional work to be done. Sometimes we come in, we're like, oh, this is great, right? That's built-in value because we know we don't have to do that work.
You might have some luck here. These are the original pot lights, so they drop. These are slightly drop ceiling.
Yeah, this is a drop ceiling.
But you can see it right here. So from the steps, you can see exactly how much is dropped, right?
Oh yeah. Anyway, you see me keep on tapping this. I was tapping it because I was like, oh, it's hollow. That's why I kept on. I was doing it unconsciously or subconsciously. I didn't realize. I wasn't verbalizing what I was doing. I was trying to test to see whether I thought that we could gain additional height. So if you rip down all this drywall, so Zane was just pointing out the fact that that's probably the joists actually. So you might actually be able to, instead of going down, you could actually just eliminate this drop ceiling to get the ceiling height you wanted, actually. So thank you for that.
And then there's a chance that you might be able to get this much from.
And funny enough, if you come in here, I don't know why this is the case, but then there's a step down to the bathroom too. So this is a step down to the bathroom, like, okay, I don't see this, I see this once in a while, not a lot. The step down to the bathroom might mean that the footings are actually lower, so it might mean you could break up the entire slab and get.
But this
even more.
potential, the combination what you said, dig down to the footings, plus that.
Plus that.
Will potentially give you the 6'5" to 6'11" that is required.
I mean, so just budget, it'll cost you $100K and it might end up costing you 30 when you open it up.
Yeah.
Right?
You should
Like,
budget for it.
just budget
Budget for
100K
it.
because it will, like,
Right.
you just don't know
Yeah.
till you buy it.
Anyway, we're
Budget
getting
100
deep,
and
we're
then
getting
minus
deep
30.
into construction. Let's walk through and see what we're looking at.
So you guys think the benefits of someone that's really strong in construction, Zane knows what he's doing, he's done a lot of this.
Just assume that it'll always cost you more.
Yeah.
And then you'll be happy.
So this is great to rent to a hobbit. So funny enough, what you can see here is this was the original exterior. If you come up, this is the original exterior. Actually, you can see this brick, and then they did an extension. They dug this all out, created more square footage. They dug it all out, and then this is a concrete block foundation.
Yes.
So, and then they had a brick facade on top of that. So this is not atypical actually for Little Italy, especially when you had Little Italy, Little Portugal. You had basically like Italians and Portuguese tend to keep their places actually quite good structurally speaking, and then just the grandma style finishes that are dated. So we love houses where, you know, the Italian grandpa back in the day, you know, maintained the house really well and good foundations, and when he did stuff, it's structurally sound. That's the kind of stuff we're looking for. So this house actually might have that type of potential because they did an extension. It's unlike the other one. The other one, not a good foundation on the extension. We saw that. It was slanting. We saw that on the interior, and then we went to the exterior. You saw like they just covered it with a bit of wood, right? But here, it's solid. So let's see. Let's see what we got here.
So, honest answer.
This is interesting. the lot lines here, this is the semi, and then there's a, yeah, so come on through, guys.
Interesting use of space.
It's not too far.
The garage?
That's the garage. So you can see here that, you know, you have less distance here than the previous house. You needed 7.5 meters. What is that? I'm not sure. But it means that with the previous house, there's a chance you could have built the laneway suite even closer to the main house. This one, less of that opportunity. It's still, you need 24.5 feet, like 7.5 meters, right? You can see, like, this is nothing. This is not part of the main house, right? So they'd be measuring it from here.
Yeah.
Is there anyone else here who want? Is you the last person?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I like their roofing.
Yeah, this is the feature.
This measurement has to be 24.
From
The wall to the
so
garage.
from the start of the laneway suite and the rear main wall of the house,
Yeah.
minimum 24.5 feet or 7.5 meters. So what I'm saying is, depending on this distance, you may or may not be able to get the square footage you want in the laneway suite. So the distance, that distance, directly corresponds to what you can build on a laneway suite. So if, for example, imagine this was a smaller lot. Imagine this main wall. Okay, imagine the garage was 10 feet closer. There's lots like that, obviously. You would have to tear that down and build the laneway suite start the laneway suite even further back, impacting the square footage, impacting your business model, or not build a laneway suite, or amputate the main building. Like some combination of that.
That depends also on the width of the driveway.
The width is not as much of a restriction from a approval standpoint. What the width actually, how it plays a role is going to be around square footage and layouts. You technically can still build a laneway suite even on a much narrower lot. You might not get the layouts that are optimal, and you will lose a lot of square footage.
But this way will be the entrance from the road, the street that is
The
on
lane,
back,
the lane, yes.
And that needs to have as a specific width?
It does not have. You
No,
don't need a specific
it's only the width, the distance between the house and
There's a lot more that goes into
Okay.
what the restrictions and what you're allowed to build and how big, and that's why what we do is we normally get a report. If we're serious about actually pursuing this and putting in an offer, we'll get a report from a professional, from an expert, who will give us like a 90 to 95% confidence interval around being able to build. They'll tell you, this is what we think we can build. Here are the unknowns. Here's the size. This tree might be an issue. The limiting, like the distance between the houses might be an issue. The distance from a fire hydrant might be an issue. They'll outline all of that in a report. So we can check off very high level things, but then they'll be the ones to take that confidence interval from like what we say maybe, 60%. You're checking off a bunch of boxes, and they can raise that to like 90%. So it's all about risk mitigation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Literally, we're not going to be able to know 100% until you've got a survey, and then because we're guessing. It's an educated guess based on the tools we have, based upon like MPAC, GeoWarehouse, like being able to look at these firms that we work with have certain tools that they use. You're not going to know until you got a survey in hand, and then you have to get a survey, which takes like 6 weeks, and then
don't have the time.
and then it costs like $2,500, right? But we can get that confidence interval up very high before we even pursue that route, before we put in an offer. Yep, let's go back in.
Is that a laneway house over there?
So that would be a grandfathered one.
Okay.
Oh my god, right, isn't it? Anyway, there's ones that have been built from before, right? You were allowed to build laneway suites before, actually. The difference now is that it's part of as of right. there's legislation's been passed that allow you before to build, like, anyone can build whatever they want, with or without permits. You're not allowed to, but people do it, right? So like a lot of stuff might be built but not with permits, and they just did it quietly, right? Or if they wanted to do it with permits and with permission, they would normally have to go to like committee of adjustments. You'd have to go ask for these approvals, go to OMB, like all these approval processes. The difference now is that they can do it as of right. So rewind 4 years ago or 5 years ago, whatever, they passed legislation that allowed laneway suites to be built as of right. It's part of Toronto's plan for densification, right? That's the difference. So now we can do it very easily. Before it was very painful to do. It took years to go through the approvals process. Now, 6 months, you can have permits in hand. It takes six months to build. So in 12 months, you can have something erected. So over there, that's not obviously something that got built in the last 5 years. So this was not built as part of this laneway suite legislation. This was something they either built quietly or they went through the approvals process. It was very, very painful back in the day. Okay, let's go back in. A couple of things that we look for. Actually, so we look at
100 amps.
100 amp. So we look at the electrical panel, right? We want to see what kind of service is running here. Generally speaking, 100 amps is not going to be enough to support a triplex or a fourplex, right? You normally upgrade that to 200 amp. Once you get to 400 amp, oh man, it's just like, that's a whole other level of shit you got to deal with. You actually have to bury it underground and bring it, and that price tag is like 60, 70 grand. It's a lot versus just a simple upgrade to the panel, right? Bringing 200 amp service here. So this is an old panel, and here, let's take a look at, oh, thanks. So this snake skin looking stuff here, this is knob and tube, right? So knob and tube wiring is an old style of wiring. It's, to be honest, it's not quite as bad as they make it out to be, but the reality is insurance companies, if they know about it, will mandate that you take it out within like the first 30 days of acquisition. And so the problem with, this could be old knob and tube that it's been cut later on, and so it might be inactive. We won't know a lot of this until we bring an electrician through, right? What?
I think that's just old copper.
Is that old copper? Yeah, okay, you might be right. So the sheathing on this is atypical, because normally like an old wiring that looks like snake skin, and then you'll see little knobs. It's all covered. It's hard to show you, but they'll go through these little knobs. In knob or tube wiring, so even if this isn't, so I'm not very, I don't do realty. I haven't done this in a very long time, so I'm a little out of practice. But if this was knob or tube, let's just say, so Tim actually knows more about this than I do. But if it was, normally you'd have to take it out. But here's the reality: it's not quite as dangerous as they make it out to be. It is still fairly safe. Aluminum, I think, is a little more of a concern. But either way, if the insurance company knows about it, they'll make you take it out. If you're gutting this place and you're turning into you're gonna redo electrical anyway. But in the event, the hard part about electrical and redoing electrical isn't the electrical. It's the fact that they're gonna punch a bunch of freaking holes all the way through the home because they're gonna pull the wiring through. So that's actually the bigger pain. The electrical component is not that difficult actually. But we look at the panel to see whether you think it's sufficient or whether that's something.
For the most part, though, if you're gonna get separate units, if you're gonna convert it to a triplex, you're gonna have to rewire everything anyway.
You're gonna rewire everything. You might even put sub panels in each of the units. You're gonna have to upgrade the service from 100 amp to 200 amp. Right? There's a bunch of things you're gonna have to do here. So electrical is gonna be part of the price tag as we look to do a renovation on this property.
But what I'm saying is, if it's knob and tube, it's not as detrimental if you're doing a triplex conversion.
Oh, if you're already opening those walls, then it's like I said, the bigger pain is closing up those walls, right? Like the damage that gets created. Pulling these wires through is not that big of a deal, and they're just you're gonna rewire the entire house. One thing that we look at, and it's too bad we couldn't get into the previous house, but when we're in the basement, so what we want to look for, so this this is the exterior wall. That's the party wall. What we look for is water penetration. So what we want to do is use our senses, right? Dampness, smell, you could see it. One of the things that we see is if we have water penetration, like through the foundation, it's not waterproofed, water will come in. Water, if this is damp and then once it dries, it leaves a crystal-like substance called efflorescence.
That's always just helping with the word.
I know, I almost forgot it. So that's one of the things that we're looking for. So we shine a light and we're like, hey, do we see kind of like this crystal-like kind of shiny thing? That's a indicator that we have water penetration issues. Water is the biggest issue on houses, right? So that's one of the things we look at, for example. But you know, we don't see it here, but there's also lots of paneling. So.
Okay, let's talk about the basement. Basements are always the most interesting. They really tell you the good and bad of a property. Okay, a couple of things. Let's start with ceiling height. So to have a legal unit, the ceiling height for a legal unit, we need 6'5", right? We don't have 6'5" right in here. We're short of that.
6'5" everywhere, or like what about ductwork?
Excellent question. So it's 6'5" for a percentage. I don't know exactly what that is. There is allowance for things like ductwork, but it's a little more complicated because if my ductwork also runs through like a passageway, they won't allow that. So it has to be kind of off to the side like this. So in general, use 6'5", but know that there is some allowance if you're doing it sensibly, right? Okay, so this is a drop ceiling though, so we probably have another like 4 or 5 inches we could get us to legal basement. We've got the front entrance, which is really good. So things that I'm looking for when I'm down here. One, looking at the panel, super old, 100 amp service. That needs to be changed. So we're looking at change. Yep, there it is. And you'll see there's some wires in there with like what looks like a fabric wrapping on them. Those are potentially aluminum wiring. That's a no-go. That would need to be replaced. Yeah. So the electrical here is like, I'd be doing a full gut here. Let's put it that way. And at that time, I could be replacing all the electrical. Like I wouldn't be keeping anything in here, even though it is in pretty good shape.
Full gut of what? Sorry, the electrical or house?
The whole house.
The whole house.
Yeah. So that electrical wouldn't be staying, but that should be part of your budget, right? Would be replacing electrical there. In terms of the basement down here, the other thing I'm looking for is windows. So every bedroom must have a window. Every common space must have a window. So at a minimum, if I want a 2-bedroom layout, I need 3 good windows. These are fine. There's no minimum size. Well, I shouldn't say that. There is a minimum size, but it's quite small. These do meet that. I don't like, however, how much below grade we are. This is gray, like right here. So like if you open the curtain, like the ground is right there. In the wintertime, when it's snowing, I've got no separation between my window and snow. I'm going to get snow buildup on that window there. That's a potential for water penetration, right? I'd rather be stepping up a couple more steps on the front, have a slightly higher main level, and have my basement more above grade, right? So that I have bigger windows and windows that aren't so close to the ground. It's not a deal breaker, but it is something to be careful of, and depends on how bad it is. This one is right on ground level, so you have to be a little careful with this. Sometimes you see them a couple of inches above ground level, and like I can live with that because at least when it's water, I'm not getting through, and if there's snow, I can shovel. But this is right on ground level, so you have to be a little careful with something like this. Okay.
How about a window well?
You can do a window well here. The only problem with doing a window well is, well, this is not quite the right property for it, but the way I'd like to lay them out is I like to have everybody have their own dedicated entrances. If I don't have to share any common space, it's better, right? No arguments about who cleans up the mud that's in on the tiles or whatever. It's everybody's responsible for their own areas. So ideally, I like to have dedicated area up to the top themselves, walk around to the back, dedicated entrance at the rear, We talked about that on the upstairs. So walk-through side, dedicated entrance up to the rear. And basement have their own entrance. Now everybody's got their own entrance to take care of. There's no sharing, no problems. And it also makes permitting easier as well. So if I have window wells, I may be cutting into my side setback, right? Because they're open. Now you can get graded window wells, but now we're starting to get into exemptions for certain things. Generally, if I'm cutting a big hole though, that counts against my 90 centimeters that I might need, right? So ideally, I'm getting a home that has like the windows already taken care of. And this is what I mean, like, I'm never going to find a 10 out of 10. And if I do, it's expensive. Can I get around some of these things? Like, maybe window wells are the only problem in a property, in which case that might work, because I could solve for this issue. Other things, water penetration. I saw there was a little bit of staining on the walls of the back there. I didn't take a super close look, but always be careful of water penetration in these older homes. Basements are going to cost the most for you to renovate because you're going to need waterproofing, you're going to need sump pumps, you're going to need to move HVAC around potentially. So you spend the most in the basement and they rent out for the least. But you need them in order to make the business case, right? You need that extra 1,800, 2,400, whatever the layout happens to be. Otherwise, the business case doesn't work. But in these older homes, it's not uncommon to see some sort of water penetration. So typically, when you're doing your renovation budgets, account for needing to waterproof the basement and putting in a French drain and sump pump, right? Yeah.
Waterproof in the basement, meaning like putting a pitch on the outside? Or...
So there's a material you apply called Delta. It's either Delta FL or Delta something. It's a Delta and then 2 letters. It's a plastic membrane with dimples. It goes against... so instead of trying to fight the water from coming to the house, let the water come into the house and then manage it once it enters. Okay. Right? That's interior waterproofing. So it goes right against all the exterior walls. It goes down underneath the concrete, and then it goes into a drainage system, which collects all the water, goes to a sump pump, and that sump pump takes the water and spits it out.
What's a French?
French drain is just it's weeping tile is another word, but it's basically a pipe that would run through along the exterior of the property, which allows water to enter it. Right, so like a pipe with holes.
The French might have invented it. That's why.
Yeah, maybe the French invented it. That's why they're called French drains. I have no idea actually where the name comes from, but
I think it's Delta MS.
Delta MS, that's the one. Delta FL is the flooring. That makes sense. FL is floor. Yeah. Clearly, you've done this before.
A lot. A lot. On your fire, do you have to do like a fire-rated glass on your windows if it's close to the property line?
So no, if it is inherited. So within 4 feet, right, is the that in centimeters. So I think it's 120 centimeters then that they're looking for. To your property line doesn't require fire-rated glass, and much of it is grandfathered in. So if you have an existing window like this and you're going to replace it with a window, you don't need to replace it with a fire-rated window.
But would you get enough glazing down here with that window?
So you don't need to meet new fire-rated requirements for replacement windows, because that would get grandfathered in. Yeah. However, if I were installing a new window, that but not relocating, so net new, I would need to meet fire requirements at that time. So then fire-rated windows aren't as popular here as fire shutters. Okay. So typically the city's speccing fire shutters instead of fire-rated windows. Yeah.
So where would you add like a window? Because this is like right on the other house here.
Yes.
So you'd add windows. I don't know, over there.
I would probably not add windows here. So the way I would do it is kind of where you're standing, common area, right, kitchen common at the front, and then bedroom, grabbing this window, and I think I saw another window on that side. So bedroom to grab these 2 windows.
I was seeing though that
For the
above.
window, if you change the size, please.
You can change the size up to a certain amount.
Still not keeping the old.
You can keep the old style of window, and you can increase the size to a certain amount. That's more of a structural thing, though. It depends on how strong the foundation is here as to how big you can make that window.
In terms of fire rating, fire rated glass need to be used?
No,
If it's
no. If it's existing and you're changing it, no.
changing the size, even if it's
Yeah,
bigger.
you can still use a regular window, but your bigger constraint there is the structure, right? That's going to be what will stop changing the window.
Going back to the layout.
Hmm?
Going back to the layout. You said that you put the kitchen over there, correct? Was that
Kitchen,
common?
yeah, kitchen common, where the entrance is, like
So
this area.
my question is, wouldn't it make more sense to put it over there where all the tubing is stacked?
Yep. So it's easier
Yeah.
to put it there for sure because I can use my plumbing stack, which is what you're talking about. But in terms of usability, I would, if I had my kitchen on this side, because my entrance is over here, I'd enter into a hallway, and then I need a long hallway along the end, hallway into bedroom, and then hallway all the way to the common area at the very end. And I try to reduce the number of hallways as much as possible because hallways are not living space. They're transitional spaces. So the more hallway I have, the less usable square footage I have. So if I walk into the kitchen common area, I have no hallway. I've eliminated like 50% of the hallway, for example. And in these like tight layouts in the city, every inch, every square foot matters because we're really trying to eke out as efficient as possible. And generally, it's nicer to walk in. Like you think about a condo layout, you walk into a common area with a kitchen and living room. It's more desirable than if you open up the door and you're walking into a very long hallway.
That's true. Make it fit. The other reason would be there's no like light here needed, right? Like bathroom and kitchen.
So bathroom, no light needed. Kitchen, common area, light needed, but easy to get because I have got the door. So if I wanted to get light in there, I can just put in like a glass door, for example, to get light in. And I can put as much windows as I like on the very front and as much windows as I like on the very back because there's no building nearby, right? So no fire, I take that with a grain of salt. Obviously, still needs to structurally work for the house and whatnot, but I'm not being limited by fire requirements. That's usually the biggest limiting factor to number of windows, right? But no constraints at the front, no constraints at the rear because there's no buildings. Typically, no buildings near the front of your house and the rear of your house.
So when you say it's a full gut, like would you be running new ductwork throughout each of the units, or you use?
Yeah, I kind of use full gut with a broad brush. They actually stack the HVAC nicely on the side. You don't often see that, but this place, everything's set to the side, which is actually pretty good. So I might not replace the HVAC, but like pretty much everything else is going here. Electrical's going. I'm talking about adding kitchens and bathrooms in all sorts of places. So plumbing's being all changed. I probably have to break the floor here to get the plumbing run. So a lot is going. Maybe I'm saving some HVAC, but I still have to figure out a solution for all three. And I bet you the way it's run doesn't divide up the floors, right? Because typically you have an HVAC trunk and then you've got like a vent up and a vent down, right? That won't work because that is not fire separation. Right. So I may or may not be able to keep this HVAC.
Do you do a lot of like mini splits or?
Yeah, so mini splits very popular. It's okay, especially when we're getting to third floors. Even if we have existing forced air, third floors are so high up and get so hot in the summertime. You have supplemental oftentimes to get additional air conditioning up there. But yeah, we work with mini splits. We work like our HVAC systems are quite often unless you're really doing a full gut, full conversion, often a mismatch of what is existing and supplementing it.
You talk about underpinning? Yes, that?
Yeah, we do underpinning if it makes sense, right? So, will I buy a house that has, a 4-foot basement at the right price? you know, underpinnings. I don't know how much it is out in Niagara. Here, it's gotten expensive. Like, we're looking at something like this, probably $70,000 to do underpinning here. If you guys aren't familiar with underpinning is basically breaking the floor, going down deeper. The name underpinning comes from what they're actually doing to the foundation. So they're breaking the footing and building underneath the existing footing, so that way you can go lower. 70,000 to do it right now in the city for something this size. That's not benching. That's the proper underpinning. And like, yeah, 25K for walkouts now. So I'll do it. I try not to do it because it's so expensive.
I guess what I mean is, like, do you see like other risks around that? Like, are you looking at different kind of properties?
Oh, so the risk is like, there's kind of twofold risk. One is like the risk of spending my money poorly, right? So if I'm underpinning, it really needs to be in a neighborhood that's supporting it. Little Italy, absolutely, right? Easy to find $3 million ARVs here, right? Yeah, it's crazy. If you've known Little Italy like the last 20 years, this used to be the place you could buy $250,000. Like 20 years ago, it's like $250K, right? Not even. Now it's $3 million. So, so that's one risk. The other is execution, because underpinning is dangerous. It is the foundation of the house, and if it's a semi-detached, it is also the foundation of your neighbor's house. So don't cheap out on underpinning. We use Rock Bottom to do our underpinning. They're one of the biggest names in the city. They're one of the more expensive ones, but they do it right. They've got $2 million insurance, building insurance. They've got $2 million liability insurance. And if you're doing a semi-detached, they insure your neighbor for another $2 million. So you're very, very well insured. They do it properly in sections. They'll hand bomb it if needed. Like, that's not the place I'm looking to save money. I'll buy a cheap quartz from China if I need to, but I won't cheap out on underpinning.
What do you think about running by the room to minimize the renovation?
So renovating by the room?
No,
renting by the room?
Yeah.
So we have some clients do it, but in general we don't. And that's just more like of a tenant management thing. If you're renting out by the room, well, you're going to get better rents for sure, because now you're managing it. I think one of the big reasons, the big draws to invest in Toronto as opposed to like a smaller town, is the tenant profile. Like here, it's young professionals. I'll pat myself on the back and say, like, me in my 20s, right? Like I was very, very responsible, and like I'm not going to go. Matt likes to call the beer and weed crowd. They'll spend money on beer and weed before paying rents. You don't get that here, right? Like, I shouldn't say you don't get it, much less chance of getting it here, because people, professionals, that kind of job. When I get into a room by room rental situation, I lose that tenant profile, right? And I think if you are in Toronto, part of the reason is to get like just an easier, more, at least for me, an easier, more scalable tenant profile. It's one of the reasons I exited Waterloo. We were in Sudbury, Hamilton, Edmonton, all these other towns. We've sold pretty much everything, and we're just in Toronto now, primarily because it's easier for me to 10x my portfolio here. One building that's generating 10, 12,000 versus, 30, 40 tenants in Waterloo. That's a management nightmare. For me, it was. Right. So I rather the tenants are managing their own tenant-to-tenant issues than me having to come in and be like, hey, Joe, you didn't clean the toilet on Tuesday like you had agreed to, right? Like that's not, I'm not getting into real estate investing because that's not my dream. But for some people, they're fine with the active management, right? But for me, it's, I want more of a passive, I hate using that word because real estate investing is not passive, but nothing gives me heartache more than dealing with tenant issues. They're the most difficult to work with. So
this is a two-story home. Right? It's not bad to do a reno on a two-story home. It would be great if it were a 2.5-story home. Right? So we often see, look across the street, you can see a 2.5-story home, 1, 2, third story. right? We call it half story because it may not be a full height, or it might be slanted roofs. A true 3-story home is like squared up, right? So you have like full access. You still might have setbacks, so you might not have the full square footage, the same as the second floor necessarily, but you can still have full ceiling heights. So those would be considered a 2.5-story home. Most are actually, unless it's a newer build, it would be a 3-story. So a 2.5-story. This here, like again, really good length. Actually, so like I was saying before, I was wrong. This width is a good width. So this could be a good candidate for a triplex conversion, or maybe even 4-plex conversion, right? Because of the other entrance that's already there. So this is starting to look like it has the kind of potential we're looking for when we want to do a reno. But you have to also understand this is a big reno, right? Like you're doing a full gut. You're going through a conversion process. This is not just swinging hammers. That's a part of it. The other part of it is the planning process and the approvals process and navigating the city. So that's not always an easy thing necessarily. So we had parking out there in the back. Based on the width, I'm going to guess that that's a double car garage, 2 parking, right? So double garage, 2-car parking. Generally speaking, if you want approvals for let's say a triplex, triplex is 3 units. N-1 parking spots is generally what you need for approvals. There'll be 2 parking spots. So actually, funny enough, you got 2. Could you go with 4-plex? 4-plex, you might need a variance. You might need to go to committee of adjustments, right? So you guys familiar with committee of adjustments? It's an involved process. You're basically asking for the zoning for the area is going to support this. I'm asking for something beyond that, right? So that's what we do when we go to committee of adjustments. We're asking for variances on, it could be height if you want to build a bit higher, more square footage. If I want to do extension, I'm going beyond what my zone allows. Then I might be asking for it. I might be asking for variances. Parking is another example. There's lots of different examples of why you go to committee of adjustments. Literally, there are changes that are happening right now that are making it much easier to develop these triplexes. Without necessarily having to go to committee, without having to pay development charges. You do this incorrectly, you try to go from a single family home, like probably what this is, from a zoning standpoint or from a legal permitted use standpoint, single family, go to triplex, go to 4-plex, go to a triplex, you'll pay 2 development charges. Those 2 development charges could be like 120 grand, 150 grand, depending on the size of the unit and number of bedrooms. You go to 4-plex, you could be paying 3 development charges for units 2, 3, and 4. These are the same development charges you get when those guys build those high-rise condos. There are changes that are happening right now, happened sort of like late last year, which are eliminating those development charges or suspending them, or it's kind of hard to say, but for all intents and purposes, call it just eliminating the development charges. And then there's more changes that are happening that are not allowing nosy neighbors to appeal your committee of adjustments decisions anymore. So all that NIMBYism, does anyone know what NIMBY means? What does NIMBY mean?
Not in my backyard.
NIMBY, not in my backyard. Everyone agrees housing is a problem. Everyone agrees that there's not enough housing. There's a housing shortage. And then you got these damn neighbors who are like, oh yeah, I agree it's a problem. I don't want more density near my house though. Right? And so there's changes that are happening in the community of adjustments that are disallowing now, let's say, private individuals to interfere with that approval process. I can't understate this enough because literally your neighbors can block you from proceeding. They can literally, if you guys own a home in Toronto, you probably have got something in the mail that said, your neighbor is going to committee of adjustments and this is what they want to do. They literally send you their plans. So I had a neighbor that literally interfered with, and I was just building a single family home. I wasn't even building a triplex or a 4-plex. It interfered and said, well, I don't think you should be building that. And then literally went and held us up for a year plus. just because they felt like it. And then that was exactly the problem though. So kudos to the city, they're eliminating stuff like that so that allows stuff to proceed so we can get densification and we can get more units. Right? Anyway, like I said, I was wrong in the beginning. The width looks good now. Like this actually means that we have more of an opportunity. We would still keep the staircase, walk in through the front door. You'd probably walk through the front door. You'd probably, sorry, on the main floor, was there an exit on the main floor at the back? Can't remember. There wasn't, right? No, okay. So which means that, number one, you punch a hole through, right? Not as bad as punching a hole through a basement when there's no walkout, because you gotta dig out that freaking basement. Not as bad, you just punch a hole through. So you can create a basement, you can create an entrance in the back, and that could be the entrance to the main floor unit. Or you could create it, you walk through the front door, and then that being the common area to, for example, I walk through the front door over here. I walk through the front door, the stairs are going up, and then there's a door there to the main unit, and then I walk up the stairs to this unit. That's a pretty typical layout too.
So the one issue is that like this width is really nice, but then it really cuts in.
It cuts in as of around kitchen area.
Yeah, well, so even the second bedroom.
It'll be the same on the second floor, right?
Yeah.
And so depending on how, it would depend on how the layouts were. Like you could still get a nice 2-bedroom unit.
The problem will be that like on the ground floor you can eliminate that staircase going down to the basement, so you can get those 3 feet back. Here, this is not even 3 feet right now. You need to have 3 feet for your hallway. So when you kind of at the back, it'll be very, very, very narrow. No?
Well, at the back, you're not going to have that
Yeah,
staircase.
you're not going to have that staircase.
Right? So at the back, you could create a bedroom, for example. You could create a bedroom up here, split bedroom layout, and then you could have all the common stuff in the middle: kitchen, living room, and stack a bathroom against.
You probably just want all of this stuff here in the middle to be open concept, so you don't have to have this.
Exactly, right? So you could literally gut from maybe this wall to the back, and that being enough room for bathroom, kitchen, and living slash kind of open concept dining. So like here, you may be able to create that 2-bedroom layout actually, and clock breaker. So the main floor actually has even more square footage, because if we were to look at this, chances are that if I look through this window, I'm looking down at the roof. Yeah. So the opportunity here. So I mean, this is not bad, right? The opportunity here is you can open this up. You can create a walkout. And here, I'm not sure if the view. Well, okay. Look at the back of the houses. Sometimes, especially if there's a 3rd floor, and then this walkout patio was built on the roof of the 2nd floor, right? Then you're 1 floor higher, and sometimes you can see over all the houses, and depending on the exact location of the house and trees and everything, sometimes you get a straight view of the same tower. Right? So that's another really nice feature that you can incorporate here without too much additional cost. You open this up, create some decking, so you can create the walk-up patio here. It'll be exclusive to this room.
The foundations are pretty good. Could you just make another extension up here?
You can. We'd have to look at zoning. We'd have to look at GFI, basically a gross floor index, to make sure that you're not exceeding. Although this is one of the changes that literally is happening underneath our feet right now, is that GFI is no longer a limiting factor when looking to, like, you don't need a variance for it.
What's GFI?
Gross floor index.
Okay.
So like your density, if I want to add more square footage, that's one of the changes that's literally happening like today or yesterday or something like that in the city, right? But anyway, to answer your question, as long as you're not triggering any other variances, GFI is not the problem. So yes, you could, in theory, if the layouts made sense and you wanted to do that, it's a big undertaking. Anytime you're dealing with structural or building envelope and doing extensions, it's a big job. So even if the foundations are good, you still have to like frame it all out, and then it's a big job. But technically, it's possible.
In the sense that if you're already doing the big job of
Yeah.
converting it? Because
Well,
that itself is a big jump.
It is a big job, but we're talking about interior. Once you start talking about structural and building envelope and
You're going to be doing a committee of adjustment anyway. The basement, when you think about it, you can only put windows on that side of the thing. You're not 4 feet away from the property line. I think it's a shared driveway, I'm not sure, with the other side.
I think it's just a walkway.
It's not, it's a half walkway.
Yeah.
Yes, but if you own half the walkway, your window has to be 4 feet from the property line, right?
So you can grandfather existing windows.
Which we don't have. So if you wanted to make the basement into 2 suites, you'd have to put in new windows.
Where was the? Okay, so you went down.
The windows were all interior windows to another room.
Yeah,
Really?
So,
Okay.
so you'd have to put in new windows. So you'd either have to sign a shared agreement with your neighbor,
LDA.
or you'd have to put in like some kind of sprinkler or something, or go to COA.
Well, I
You
mean-
will go to COA.
Okay, so there's certain things the COA will allow you, and certain things they won't. Fire safety, they will not allow you a variance. Like there's no question. That's literally life or death type of stuff. This is not about zoning and variance to the zoning bylaws or anything of the sort. Again, zoning is just around the city's way to influence a particular area, and building code. There can be you can get variances for certain things. You can't get variances for fire safety. So if it's a matter of methods of egress, if it's a matter of window sizes, sometimes there's no ways around those things from a variance perspective, which means you have to get them actually, or you have to reconfigure your layout. This is where you hire an architect, and the architect is going to configure it in a way to help you maximize. So utilizing existing window openings, you can't necessarily create new ones because of distance, but you can keep additional ones, and they might say, okay, you can enlarge the window, so now it's fine from a method of egress perspective.
So probably these ones were
Grandfathers.
Old, like, building code has changed over time, right? So like people have done stuff a long time ago, and stuff just grandfathered in, which is why if it's there, you can keep it. But if you try to do something new, if I want to open a new window here, I might be running up against that. Right? So this I don't know about window openings. Is that a variance?
So you can't. You have to do one of two things. You either
Fire
make
shutters.
So you either put a fire shutter, you put a Georgian glass window so that you can't open it, but you can get the light. So that's fine.
Is that or glass block?
Well, it's fire shutter, Georgian glass, or sprinkler.
Sprinkler. Okay.
One or the other.
Yeah. So these types of things are possible. Fire shutters are windows in which case, if the glass if there's a fire, the fire shutters automatically trigger and shut. And what it does is supposed to be protection.
I'm just putting it in one of my units. I'm putting in a fire shutter. It's like an extra $1,500. It's not terrible. If you want to think about it this way, if you're installing 4 windows, if the window costs you, well, I don't know, $1,000, just think that the window costs you $3,000. But if it allows you to get the extra unit, it's not.
Yeah, for sure.
It's not a problem you can't solve.
Yeah. So this is the property line. It looks like they have a good enough relationship between the neighbors that this is a really good sized walkway. Yeah. You don't always get this, right? Which means that these people probably have a pretty good relationship, and they allow this. So you can walk to the back. So you see here, what they've done is this is the extension, and they've basically tried to seal this off, right? So is this done well? It could have been done better.
You see that guy, right? The extension that they brought it back just to here.
Yeah.
Almost certainly that means you'd get permission to do it too.
Yeah. So what Zane's talking about is when you're going to ask for permission, what they look for is precedence in the area. So if someone else has done it, you now have ammunition, let's say, to go to COA and ask for that same permission. Because essentially what they're going to look for, your architect or your planner or whomever else is representing you is going to do a survey of 100, is it 100 or 200 meters? Circumference, not circumference. What's the radius? radius around to see what has been done that supports you in asking for whatever it is that you're asking for. And so what Zane's talking about is, hey, that guy had an extension. Why can't we do an extension? So that does provide you with a case that you can go do with COA and ask for. Yeah.
It's exactly what you have right here. My point is you can just take this first floor, which is where you have that second bedroom, and you could just go right up and make the first floor, the second floor the same size as the first. Yeah. That doesn't change your entrance, it doesn't change anything. It's actually, it's a question for a structural engineer. If the footings are good enough, and you hope that whoever made these footings hopefully planned for it.
Or it could be even like something like that. Like it can be an extension like that.
Well, here, like what I was saying when we were in here was that I was like, oh, you can build a deck here. What they did was they actually have that's a 2.5 story home. So there's one more level on top, and then they built on top of the second floor. They built a walkout patio there, right? So actually, we like 2.5 story homes. If we're doing this much work, we typically like spending a little bit extra on the home and getting a 2.5 story home.
If you don't make the extension, you could just make a walkway out here to the roof, so you don't have to make it inside. But I mean,
you could do exterior. You could do exterior entrances as well. Here, you probably have the ability to go through the main floor here, which means the front door could go up to the second floor unit without having to do go straight up.
Staircase, yeah.
What I mentioned, I'm not sure if you heard. Well, we like to see staircases a little closer to the front door, so you don't waste that square footage.
Yeah.
Right. If you're doing it, depending on the extent of what you're doing, if you're doing a full gut and you're doing a lot of structural changes anyway, you might have the chance to move the staircase because you're already removing. Normally, you stack staircases. So what you saw was the staircase to the basement. It's usually stacked on the staircase that's going from the main floor to the second floor. But if we're removing that staircase already from the basement, then because that's a very efficient layout. If you're already moving this, maybe and like you're doing a lot of structural changes, maybe you could just move the staircase. Moving the staircase is not a trivial thing; it's a big job because it reconfigures layouts a lot, and you have to. There's a lot of engineering work that has to go into like supporting that load and all that stuff. I'm not going to get into that, but there's that possibility of. Or, I mean, Zane's talking, we're always thinking creatively how to optimize layouts. Like, for example, if you're going to build another story on here and make this into like a properly this, maybe you go 5-plex, right? Maybe the third floor is a separate unit. Second floor a separate unit, main floor separate unit, and then basement separated into 2 units, right? Not that that's a trivial
That's what
thing.
they have right over there, right? Like there you have that third floor.
Thanks, man.
Is it a walk? Can you walk up to it? I can't see.
I mean, there's windows there. There must be.
Which house are you pointing at?
Like those two green ones.
The green one?
Yeah.
Well, it's a walkout patio. I don't see stairs though, so there doesn't seem to be an exterior staircase.
Yeah.
But what Zane's talking about is, for example, imagine a scenario and there's another floor, and imagine part of your aspiration is to turn this into, call this a 4-plex, basement 1 unit. Forget splitting it up for now. Main floor 1 unit, second floor 1 unit, third floor 1 unit. The question is, how do you get to that third floor? You can have an interior staircase, but if you didn't want the interior staircase, you might be able to do an exterior staircase. So that's what Zane's talking about. And that might be a good solution if you wanted to, like, if this was already a 2.5 story home, or if you wanted to top it up, right? Which in case, again, big work, but for the right property, for the right person who knows how to develop those types of properties, you might be able to turn this into a 4-plex. Or, like, if you did another floor right here, you could probably get another unit up there, let's just say hypothetically. And if you separated the basement out into 2 units, that could be literally a 5-plex in the main building. We don't see that a lot, but there could be a possibility if you want to do that. Quite easily, not going to say easy, but a lot easier is actually just using the existing building envelope, go 2 basement units. We still have to deal with a lot of other stuff, but 2 basement units, 1 main floor unit, 1 second floor unit. Or if you're going to go simpler, it's literally second floor unit, 1 unit, main floor 1 unit, basement 1 unit. And then the, you good?
Yeah. Yeah, we should. Yeah, we should.
Okay, and then the last one is laneway suite as a tack on, right? It's a separate suite.
I'm gonna head over.
Yeah, okay, we need to head over. Actually, last thing.
One last thing. Never allow one last thing. Yes.
Pretty good. So depending on the size, depending on distance from the main house, how far you can push out that wall Tim's standing near, and depending on where this lives on the lane, for example, you may be able to build a pretty good sized. Wilson, correct me if I'm wrong. We already got a lane.
We did. So we have 2 laneway reports of discrepancies. So there's one that actually allows for just over 1,000 square feet for the home. And then the other one says 280 on each floor, so 560. So
Big difference.
big difference.
Funny enough, these are both fairly reputable sources that we went to, and between 2 experts, there's a discrepancy. So again, this is best efforts guess, right? It's educated guesses. What I said before, we're not going to know until we actually get a survey. It's going to be one that's going to fully ascertain what we're allowed to build here.
But you don't need a garage for a triplex. You don't have two garage for triplex.
You don't need a garage at all.
Oh, it's not a requirement.
That's not a requirement. You can turn this into a 2-story building. That's a laneway suite. And what I mentioned before, I'm not sure if you heard, one of the things we do is let's just say that let's just say the laneway is out there. The first floor has to be set back 5 feet. First floor, not the second floor, just the first floor. So there could be an overhang on the second floor.
Okay.
If we pull that back an additional 3 feet, not too much more, you lose 3 feet times about 20 width, so 60 square feet on the interior. But what you gain is a parking pad. Imagine a car can just come in and park like this.
Okay.
It's an informal parking pad. It's not a real one. I recognize by the city, but informal parking pad because you need about 8 feet width for a car, generally speaking. So we can still get a parking spot. It's not going to be a garage, not quite as nice as a garage, but you don't lose a ton of square footage, and you gain a parking spot still. So but anyway, to answer your question, there's no requirement for parking necessarily. There is a parking requirement though if you want to do a triplex conversion. Normally, if you want to do 3 units, you need n minus 1 parking spot.